Lanham here. Let's talk about mixtures and solutions. First thing, we got to talk about matter and how we classify it a little bit here. Matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. Okay, side note, I'm an astronomy teacher. That statement is not true. Yeah, it's true, but there's one place in the universe where matter has mass but does not take up space. That's a black hole. That's where all the matter is condensed to zero volume. But that's just for fun. It's real, though, for real. All right, end of side note. So, as far as we're concerned, matter's anything that has mass, takes up space. You're never going to encounter the weird stuff in your life. Oh, yeah. It can be a solid, a liquid, or a gas. And keep in mind some of the names of this. You can go from liquid to solid, that's freezing. Going from solid to liquid is melting. Going from gas to liquid is condensing. And going from liquid to gas, we can say it evaporates. Not perfect definitions, but it's close. Alright, if you'll remember, we talked about mixtures and substances. And a mixture is when you put a couple things together. It's a variable ratio. These are things that can be separated by what are called physical means. You can physically sort it. You can do filtering. You can use a sieve, like they do in the Indiana Jones, where they're trying to sift out sort of, stuff out of the sand or something. I know that's an old 80s movie before you were born. You can use magnets to separate things. Floating versus sinking. There's this thing that went around on the internet for a while that if you did not take the bottle cap, or if you left the bottle cap of your water bottle off, they would not recycle it. You had to put the lid back on the bottle for them to recycle. It's really weird because what they do is they take your water bottles, run it through a giant shredder, and then they put the plastic in big vats of water and they separate it by floating and sinking. I think the plastic that they want sinks and the garbage and stuff floats. I don't remember. You can separate things by evaporation, distillation, chromatography. Chromatography is kind of cool. If you take a marker, like a Sharpie or something, and mark a white piece of paper and then it gets wet, the individual components of that ink will spread out on the paper and you'll get kind of a rainbow effect. So if you've ever, it works with some pen ink too. So if you've ever gotten your paper wet and you get all these weird colors and stuff, that's chromatography. A mixture can be a solution, which is when one thing dissolves in another. And one thing that you want to remember is a solution cannot be separated by filtration. I'm going to test you on that in a minute here. Mixtures can have visible parts. So if you have sand and water, you can distinguish those nicely. Oil and vinegar. No, oil and vinegar. Iron and sand. We can have no visible parts. If there are no visible parts, that's homogeneous, otherwise known as a solution. So salt water, Kool-Aid, those would be solutions. So question for you. How would you separate a mixture of sand and water? If you need to go back and if you need to pause it, go back and look at that list of how to separate them out. If you said filter, you are correct. You just need some filter paper, run it through, the water will drip out, and there we go. If you're ever out in the wilderness and you need to make water, you've got really nasty water, you can actually filter it yourself. You'll want to do things like have sand and gravel to get the big stuff out of there. But one of the key components is charcoal. It's going to remove a lot of the poisons and nasty stuff that you don't want in there. The ash from a fire pit, though, actually has lye in it, which is why they used to use ash to make soap and everything. But a little tip in this picture, add a little bit of cotton or something at the bottom, tear off a shirt, cotton ball, whatever. Makes it a little bit nicer. Here's some kid I found on the internet. I think his name was Leroy Jenkins. You can look him up, but it's just a simple water filter. So how would you separate sand with iron? Looks like a cake or something like that, but it's really just sand and iron, again, from the internet. You would use magnets. I remember going back, both my grandparents worked in factory for Post cereals and Kellogg's cereal. And I remember my grandfather was teaching me about magnets, and he said that one thing that they did is they had magnets that the cereal would pass through this strong magnetic field to make sure they got all the pieces of metal and metal shavings, because it's moving around on metallic equipment. If it grinds and you get metal shavings in there, that's just, yeah, not good. So how would you separate salt and water? This is a solution, so you cannot filter it. There's a very cheap ancient method of doing so, and that is simply to boil. So the water evaporates and leaves salt behind in the pan. If you wanted to collect the water, you could use a distillation method. You set up a still, but you're not making alcohol, you're just making drinking water. But this is an ancient way of getting getting salt out of the salt water and then using it for preserving your meat and everything. This is the reason that Gandhi was arrested. In colonial India in the 1930s, there was a monopoly, is what we call it today, that was in control of all the salt. And if you made your own salt, you did not pay taxes on it, and therefore you could end up in jail. So Gandhi led what was called the Salt March, where they walked like 240 miles and gathered lots and lots of people in this non-violent protest to make salt. And he was arrested for it, and that was one of the early things that helped bring the independence to the Indian nation, and also influenced Martin Luther King. So if you're interested in that, check out the Wikipedia article. It's really good. Okay, we have what are called saturated and unsaturated solutions. In order to understand this, you gotta know a few basic definitions here. There's the solute, which is what you're putting in the solvent, which is what does the dissolving. So the typical thing would be just, making sugar water, trying to dissolve your sugar in water. So the sugar would be the solute and the water would be the solvent. It is saturated when no more solute can dissolve. So anything you pour in there is going to settle to the bottom, and then it's saturated. If you can dissolve more solute, you say it is unsaturated. Sometimes that's confused with the words concentrated and dilute. Concentrated means that you got more solute, and dilute means that you have less solute. And you can usually tell that by the color or opaqueness of that. All right, that's it for today.